There's something unsettling about Resident Evil Requiem, and it isn't limited to what emerges from the darkness. It's something quieter, more difficult to define. Beneath the surface level horror, beneath the precision of its design and the confidence of its presentation, there's a lingering tension about what this game represents. Not just as an individual entry, but as a statement about the series as a whole. Because Requiem doesn't simply feel like another installment, it feels like a reflection, a culmination of ideas that have been refined over decades. And at the same time, it raises an uncomfortable question. Has Resident Evil reached a point of mastery or a point of hesitation? At a glance, the game is an undeniable success. Critically, it stands tall, supported by strong scores and widespread praise for its craftsmanship. It delivers a polished, cohesive experience that rarely falters in execution. For many players, that alone is enough, but the deeper conversation surrounding Requiem is not about whether it succeeds. It clearly does, but about the nature of that success. Because while most people agree that the game is good, even impressive, there's a far less agreement on what it ultimately achieves. Is it a defining moment for the franchise, or is it simply the most refined version of what has already been done? What grounds the experience more than anything else is its gameplay. This is where Requiem feels most confident, most deliberate. It is built around dual perspectives that are not just narrative devices but mechanical identities. Each side of the experience is designed to evoke a different emotional response, and the contrast between them forms the backbone of the game. One perspective is rooted in vulnerability. Movement feels cautious, almost hesitant. Resources are limited in a way that forces restraint, encouraging players to think carefully before every action. Every encounter carries weight, not because it's overwhelming, but because it is uncertain. The player is never fully in control. The other perspective shifts that balance. It introduces a sense of momentum, of capability. Encounters become more direct, more immediate. Combat is more frequent, more demanding, and while tension never fully disappears, it is reshaped into something more active. There's a sense of control here, but it is not absolute. It requires precision, awareness, and adaptation. What makes the structure compelling is not simply the contrast, but the transitions between these states. The game moves between vulnerability and empowerment with a deliberate rhythm, preventing either from becoming dominant for too long. It is a careful balancing act, and for the most part, it succeeds. The result is a gameplay experience that feels consistently engaging, rarely stagnant, and meticulously tuned. Yet gameplay alone does not define Requiem. What elevates it, what gives it its identity, is its atmosphere. This is a game that understands the power of restraint. It does not rely solely on sudden shocks or overwhelming threats. Instead, it builds tension gradually and almost methodically. The environments are constructed with intent, narrow corridors, obstructed sightlines, spaces that feel designed not just to contain the player, but to confine them. Visibility is often limited, forcing the player to rely on sound, on instinct, and on anticipation. And it is in that anticipation that the game finds its strength. Sound design plays a critical role in this. Distant noises echo without clear origin. Subtle environmental cues suggest movement where none is immediately visible. Silence stretches uncomfortably, turning empty space into something threatening. In its most effective moments, the game removes the player's sense of control, not through spectacle, but through limitation, of vision, of information, and of certainty. These sequences are not simply frightening, they are oppressive. They create a sustained sense of unease that lingers long after the moment has passed, and in doing so, Requiem reconnects with its core identity that defined the series in its earliest form. Technically, the game reinforces this atmosphere with remarkable consistency. Its presentation is polished, not excessive. Visual detail is used with purpose rather than indulgence. Lighting in particular is handled with precision, obscuring as much as it reveals, shaping the player's perception of space and guiding attention in subtle ways. Character models are expressive, though not flawless. There are occasional moments where facial animations fall short of the emotional weight required, but these instances are minor and they rarely disrupt immersion. Sound, however, remains a standout element. It's not simply a layer added on top of the experience, it is foundational. Every ambient noise, every environmental interaction, every moment of silence is calibrated to reinforce tension. Nothing feels accidental. And yet, for all its strengths, the game begins to show complexity when its narrative comes into focus. The story starts with clarity. There is direction, a sense that events are building towards something cohesive. But as it progresses, the clarity begins to fragment. New threads are introduced, not all of which are fully explored. Certain character arcs feel abbreviated, while others linger without resolution. For players deeply familiar with the series, there is a resonance in these elements. Connections that carry meaning, references that evoke memory. But for others, this reliance on established ideas can feel limiting. There's a sense that the narrative is looking backwards, drawing strength from what has already been done rather than forging something entirely new. The result is a story that is engaging in moments but uneven in its overall execution. This tension extends into the game's structure as well. The dual perspective approach, while central to its design, introduces an imbalance that becomes more apparent each time. Each perspective is effective on its own, offering a distinct tone and gameplay style, but together they do not always feel equal. As the game progresses, one side begins to assert greater influence, not just in terms of gameplay, but in the overall tone of the experience. The carefully constructed tension of earlier sections gradually gives way to a more action-oriented rhythm. For some players, the shifts add variety. For others, it disrupts the cohesion the game initially establishes. It is not a flaw as much as a trade-off, one that will be felt differently depending on what the player values most. Length is another point of quiet contention. Requiem is not a long game, and its pacing reflects a deliberate effort to avoid excess. It moves forward with purpose, rarely lingering longer than necessary. For some, this is a strength. The experience feels focused, refined, and free of unnecessary repetition. But that same efficiency can also feel limiting. There is a sense that just as the game begins to fully explore its ideas, it reaches its conclusion. Moments that could have been expanded are resolved quickly. Stories that could have been developed further are left as they are. The game does not feel incomplete, but it does feel restrained, as though it chooses not to extend itself beyond a certain boundary. And perhaps that is the defining characteristics of Requiem: restraint. Not in its execution, which is confident and precise, but its ambition. This is not a game that struggles to function, it is a game that chooses to refine rather than to risk. It builds upon established systems, revisits familiar ideas, and reinforces what has already proven successful. But it rarely challenges those foundations. There are few moments that feel entirely unexpected, few that redefine the player's understanding of what the series can be. Given its tonal shifts between horror and action, echo patterns that have existed for years. Its consistency ensures a polished experience, but it also creates a sense of limitation, a feeling that the game operates within boundaries and never attempts to break. In the end, Resident Evil Requiem stands as a carefully constructed experience. It is precise, atmospheric, and deeply aware of its own identity. At its best, it delivers tension with remarkable control, engaging the player through deliberate pacing and thoughtful design. It understands what makes Resident Evil work, and it executes those elements with confidence. But it is also a game defined by its relationship to the past. It refines rather than reinvents, it recalls rather than redefines. And in doing so, it achieves a level of consistency that is undeniably impressive, while leaving open the question of what comes next. Because Requiem does not feel like a beginning, it feels like a pause, a moment of reflection, a game that gathers everything the series has been and presents it in its most polished form. But whether that reflection is enough to carry the series forward remains uncertain, and perhaps that uncertainty is what lingers most, long after the screen fades to black.